sounds like our lobby is full of vim and vigor, and people are coming back in after a nice meal and some sunshine. It has got to be 80 degrees out there in Austin today. No ill will to our friends in the north. Okay, so my name's Sarah Wilbur. I use she, her pronouns. I'm one of the co-conveners of the Building an Equitable Arts Infrastructure Symposium, also a co-convener of the Allied Research Group that's responsible for our 2 days worth of events. If you've just jumped on to HowlRound, welcome from afar. We are in for an amazing panel, and I want to get right to it. So we're going to hear from a range of amazing experts, really passionate, soulful advocates for art and artists today. So in the spirit of that, if you've just joined us, the way we've been working on these panels, all of our research group members facilitate these panels, and we go down and we go ahead and do a short introduction, who you are in the realm of fighting for more equity in the arts. We zigzag down, and then each person will take a little more time coming back up the line with, a short set of examples, propositions, things from their actual work that are manifesting that or are bringing up new models, new ways of thinking, or strategies. We're looking for all of it here. And no one person is doing the same thing as the person sitting next to them. That's by design. So thank you all for being here. Special thanks, just one more shout out to the HRC staff and to our 3 wonderful graduate assistants that are helping us out and keeping us fed. That's Michael, Aaron, and Georgia. Also Scott has been helping us move smoothly. So I do have a little framing here. Personally, I work on economics and the arts, but I ask humanistic questions of money. So how does money make people move? How does economic incentives, change artists' opportunities and movement in the world? So speaking of labor, the session is called Labor and Work, and we're confronting arts work, arts workers, and ways of working in the arts head on. So if you are familiar with cultural economist Anne Markuson, long ago, Markuson demonstrated there's only one correct answer to the question of where artists work: everywhere. And at the same time, the non-traditional character of how artists work makes the idea of arts work kind of poorly understood by the broader public, right? So it's widely reported artists are more likely to be self-employed, to accept short-term contingent contracts. This can lead to inconsistent income patterns, periods of unemployment or underemployment, lack of reliable workforce protections like insurance, sick leave, retirement, these kinds of things. I have so much respect for our panelists here today, so I'm going to get right to them. Laura Zabel, Laura Penn, Angie Kim, Alice Holden, and Alex Beasley are all here bringing their wisdom and experience to this complex and kind of contradictory practice of embodying life as a working artist in this country. So I want to dive right in and ask for introductions. So without further ado.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Zabel, and I came here from Minnesota. And I enter this conversation, and my interest in this conversation is really driven by my own artistic practice, which is as a theater maker, and also now by being the mother of an emerging theater artist in the world. And I am also the executive director of Springboard for the Arts. And what that means is that I've spent the last 20 plus years of my life tending to an arts ecology and thinking about and building infrastructure to support individual artists and culture bearers and creative workers. Springboard is an artist-led economic justice and community development organization. And we're based in Minnesota, both in the urban area of the Twin Cities, in the Frogtown and Rondo neighborhood of St. Paul, and in a rural community called Fergus Falls, which is in west central Minnesota. And Springboard's work is full of these tensions and contradictions. We're both deeply place-based and also work nationally. We work directly with over 20,000 artists every year, so the scale is large. And our work is about providing really practical tools and resources for individual artists. So entrepreneurship training, legal and health resources, access to capital. And we do that so that artists can work at all of those intersections in their communities, particularly around Main Street local economies, social connection, climate, and increasingly around local trust and local problem solving. I do this because I believe that creativity is a human right and that culture is the root of real change. And yet, like a lot of other forms of labor, like care work or community work, cultural work is not valued by our economy. So Springboard's work is both in this kind of short-term way to provide these practical resources and skills and tools to help people operate in the world that we live in now, and also to do the infrastructure and system change work to make cultural work more viable and to build more locally rooted and human-centered economies and systems so that we don't have to do the short-term work in the future. Yeah, so that's me.
Nice to meet you. Hi, everybody. I'm Alice Holden. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a partner at Keen Consulting, a small arts management consultancy. I'm a practitioner by trade, not an academic or a theater historian. That's a joke from yesterday. I like to title myself a recovering director of production for regional theaters. I only stopped doing that about a year and a half ago. And as an arts management consultant, we lean into helping clients find operational solutions. Our clients are usually regional theaters. And we also often represent clients at the collective bargaining table on the management side. So that seems a little maybe counter-programming for this particular gathering, but I believe that we do play a valuable role in increasing equity in the arts. In this new role, I see a now unique position as a practitioner, but also being outside an institution and outside unions. This allows me to seed ideas across institutions, across the country. So, you know, I'm a pollinator, hopefully. And that we believe in win-win contract design for collective bargaining agreements, working towards agreements that protect the workers and are responsive to the organization's needs. You know, and I really deeply believe that a CBA can be designed so it's a collaborative piece of art in some ways that really can thrive, help the industry thrive. This can be shown in contracts in small ways to large ways, from, you know, incorporating something really basic in a CBA like, hey, gender neutral pronouns, which is hard when you're working on a contract that's been in the business for 70 years, or advocating for readable language so that workers can read their contract and understand it and don't need a lawyer to figure out what their rights are, or the business agents have to have several conversations to explain something that should be simple. To the really large, important issues like creating contracts that create pay equity across departments that are historically gender coded, as an example. So I'm going to use this platform today to talk about some really weedy, geeky stuff in terms of labor law and CBA negotiations, and I hope you all don't mind that when I get to it. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Beasley. I'm in the American Studies Department here at the University of Texas. I'm a bit of an interloper here, perhaps. I am mostly a historian by trade, and I study the history of capitalism and specifically the history of labor. And up to this point, my research hasn't really explicitly focused on the arts, but I have studied a great deal about the role of labor and the state and kind of broadly, and something that came up in my first book project a good bit is the relationship of the arts to capital and to urban development. And the relationship of art to urban development is something that I'm following through more on my second book project. And that's kind of where I'll be coming from here, is trying to provide, you know, perhaps some thoughts, some ideas from this bigger history, and hopefully putting that into conversation with some of the concrete things that are happening in the present day.
Hi, I'm Laura Penn. I'm the executive director of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society, which is the union that represents stage directors and choreographers. We represent about 4,000 directors and choreographers across the country, from Broadway to dinner theater, outdoor musical stock, regional theaters. So we like to think it's hard or not easy to find a professional production across the country that isn't directed or put together by SDC members. I also serve as the co-chair of the Coalition of Broadway Unions and Guilds, which is a coalition of 18 unions that represent workers on Broadway. And I'm on the general board of the DPE, which is the Department of Professional Employees, which is a department of the AFL-CIO that represents professional workers. The involvement, I enjoy all of my work with the DPE, but I will say there's an arts and entertainment media industry group that is nationally recognized arts and entertainment unions, and we gather film, television, the performing arts, and we gather regularly, and my work with that group is deeply rewarding and enriches me personally and much of the work that I do. My work has always been grounded in fairness. I believe deeply in fairness, and that fairness is a strength. The first half of my career, I was actually a LORT, which is the League of Resident Theaters, so it's a nonprofit, multi-employer bargaining group of managers across the country. I was a LORT manager. I started at Arena Stage, working in the box office, and then I went to the Seattle Repertory Theater, where I finished my time there as associate managing director, and then I was the managing director of a theater in Seattle, Intiman, for almost 15 years. My work in the LORT world was really centered on negotiating agreements with artists, getting them to the theater and feeling good about the working conditions that we were able to offer them. I also did collective bargaining on behalf of the theaters, both at the Seattle Rep and at Intiman. And I was a VP, a vice president of LORT, and actually worked on the negotiations with SDC on the management side of the table. So I was then recruited for this job to run SDC, which was kind of strange. I was like, well, why would I do that? But it has turned out to be deeply rewarding. It was not a natural transition. I've been at SDC for almost just a little over 15 years now, and I find that this concept of fairness continues to be my North Star. I also think I'm able to bring, because I did spend the first half of my career making work, the understanding of how work is put together and what the structure, the infrastructure, if you will, of the theaters across the country allows me to put together contracts and to maintain relationships that make things hopefully better for everyone. I just want to call out sort of the tension of the moment, because I feel like I have to. In preparing for this, I found myself sitting down to say, okay, and I thought, oh, wait, we're like at this moment in time where everything seems so strange. And there's the need to sort of keep face forward and continue to do the work and stay anchored in what we believe in, and the impulse, personal and otherwise, to scream. So I just want to say that's inside of me, and I don't know how it'll manifest. I'll try not to scream. How about that?
Hi, everyone. I'm Angie Kim. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for Cultural Innovation. We're headquartered in California, and we are national. We are a 501c3 nonprofit arts intermediary. And the way our business model works is that we take in funding from external sources. Vast majority are private foundations, and we grant them out to people in the field. And a significant differentiator of us, and I would say Springboard and a few others, is that most arts nonprofit intermediaries are supporting other institutions in the arts. And we are distinct for supporting people in the arts. And when I took over CCI, which is the acronym we call it, when I took it over 7, 8 years ago, I was taking over an organization that was explicitly founded to support artists. And under my watch, we have expanded it to support people in the arts, and that are commercial designers, creative entrepreneurs, of course, artists of all types, cultural leaders, as well as sometimes, we just finished a relief fund for fire victims in LA County. Sometimes that includes employees of arts institutions. I say all that because that puts us in a unique position when you can claim that you're trying to support everyone in the arts, you end up backing into labor. And so we basically, at first, reluctantly, and then now we fully embrace that we are very unusual for being able to really pay attention to the labor issues and needs. And our approach is one, Sarah threw down Ann Markison. So I'll also throw down that our framework is very influenced by Ann Markison's research. She was someone that our organization used to commission research to understand the arts population just generally. I would also throw down, because I'm here at UT Austin, Francie Ostrauer, who actually still teaches here, who has a very influential book about the arts institution's role in creating a socioeconomic class of elites in society. And that history goes back much further, basically almost to the founding, but knowing then that I work in what's considered to be, I would say, the arts nonprofit industrial complex, meaning this is a self-perpetuating economy of arts 501c3s trying to help individuals in the field. One of the things that we confront and try to find alternative pathways out of is, how do we support artists in a way that doesn't continue to perpetuate privatization of everything, commodification of everything, extraction from people as the means of production. So we have quite a deep, or we try to have quite a deep economic analysis of the kind of paradigm that we are living in terms of how our economy works and who it prioritizes. It doesn't prioritize labor. So, and we do other things that are also around making sure that our systems not make up for, but acknowledging that because we're rooted in elitism, that it is also, we are absolutely as reflective in society of discrimination and exclusion. So how do we think about labor in a way that creates common cause with others who are really also financially vulnerable?
I'm so glad you're all here. It's really heartening. For anyone tuning in who hasn't had a peek at our program, there were sort of 4 orienting questions that were distributed. It was not a hard and fast, answer all 4, but to put in the room some of the questions that we've asked each respondent to attend to. They'll have 5 or 6 minutes to do so, digging deeper into what you've already heard. I'll just read those to you. So how, given each of your respective work and experience, how do you notice arts labor practices affected by the current conditions? And we've been already talking about that, yes. And how, in your work and experience, you see artists making demands on systems and institutions that they variably inhabit. They, again, have chosen something to respond to here. How, in what context, can labor organizing in the arts benefit from broader engagement, from larger labor movements, labor advocacy, labor history, maybe even in non-arts areas in particular? And then what, if any, risks surface with this preposition that art is a form of work, that artists are workers, which still strangely to me is a point of contention in places like higher education, where we credential artists and sometimes encounter tensions between workforce development and skilling and all of the actual markets and economies and invitations artists field in the world in practice. So to reverse back, Angie, are you okay to take the microphone first and offer some orienting comments, and we'll come back this way with more great news.
I got a little bit like, artists don't do work. And then I thought, but then why are literally gamers on ESPN? Are they not sports? So I don't know. So anyhow, I was going to respond to another question that was part of the thing that we got assigned. But I will say that as this moment is absolutely hard. I mean, we are looking at a contraction in the nonprofit sector. I have many friends, colleagues, people I care about. This is going to be very painful. So I don't discount any of that. People are going to lose their jobs. The economy is not looking like we're headed towards a robust direction. At the same time, part of that is longer term, a longer tail of where we are also in an economy of great wealth and divide. And so this moment is putting additional stress on people. Having said that, I also think this is the most exciting time because I don't mind the nonprofit industrial complex getting contracted. If this could also help us to have conversations like this, where we can actually say okay, if it's really teetering, and by the way, it won't collapse. It's still going to exist. Institutions are still going to exist. But while it's teetering and we have incredible people who might be looking for new homes for their ideas, experiences, et cetera, and are tired of doing the same old thing and the same old paradigms that we have been, this is the moment that we should be taking to say, okay, what should things look like? How should we be supporting artists? And how can we do it much more with a different kind of paradigm than the privatization, the thingamification that we have right now, which is all about meritocracy and competition and division and individuation, right? So I'm looking forward to basically how our work can continue to propel the effort toward perpetuating a different ideal of how artists work together. And the way we start with that is we don't look at hey, what's the arts labor market need? We instead look at what does the arts labor market have in terms of wisdom, perspectives, and common cause with other unrecognized workers, care workers, of course, domestic workers, untenured part-time faculty workers. I mean, the list is so long of all the different folks that we should be in common cause with. And yet, when we always talk about what do the artists need, we have self-siloed ourselves from being relevant to other causes that if we could all work together, whether it's healthcare, to housing, to a basic income floor, whatever that might be, we could be so much powerful together because, again, we do show up in all these different labor markets. So I find this to be a really incredible time of possibilities, and I'm so jazzed. I'm depressed, but also jazzed.
Thank you. That was really great. I'm going to speak to, there's this question about demands on support systems what demands are artists making on support systems, particularly following the pandemic. And I want to speak to unions as support systems. I suspect everybody knows this, but if you'll humor me for a moment, I just want to talk about what is organized labor. And it's when workers come together and decide that collectively they can improve their situation by more efficiently and effectively negotiating terms and conditions. Some of those basic terms and conditions include wages, benefits, health, pension, vacation, sick leave, non-discrimination, anti-harassment, safety, dispute resolution. Those kinds of things are kind of basic to labor agreements. There are also the unions. There are national unions, like SDC, we're a national union, and then there are unions that have locals, or they have sometimes I like to think of a mothership, and then locals across the country. So we all operate a little differently based on our structure and what our own ecosystem is. And I do want to say that unions have their place in our industry for artists, and there's also the ecosystem is much broader. I like to think that if someone chooses to spend their life as an artist or an arts worker, that they should have the opportunity, there should be a path to having a family if that's their choice, to whatever it may be, there should be a path to be able to make a living in this industry. And unions, I think, are uniquely positioned to make sure that opportunity exists. And yes, the pandemic completely changed our way of working. Or where it hasn't changed our way of working, it's changed the expectation for how we should be working, which may be true more often than not. And it was the pandemic and, of course, the murder of George Floyd that laid bare the inequities in our country and in our industry. I also think much of what we're seeing right now in terms of the demands that arts workers, artists are making on the organizations that they work with have their roots in the Me Too movement. So in the last number of years, theaters specifically, but performing arts organizations generally have hired HR companies, they've posted statements, staff got trained. Those are all really, really good things. But it was the unions that were able to negotiate really clear, actionable, measurable process for reporting of harassment and discrimination, and for ways in which those moments could be addressed. So many of us have heard that that's not enough, that actually the key to reducing, if not eliminating, harassment and discrimination in the workplace is around reporting. And so how do we take what we've begun to lay in, which are these very muscular non-discrimination, anti-harassment provisions in our agreements, and actually, animate them, activate them around reporting? And AGMA, which is the union that represents the American Guild of Musical Artists, opera, dance. I hear somebody talked about the situation in Dallas with the fantastic, thank you for bringing that up, the work that they did with the Dallas Black Theater Dance Company was really extraordinary. There's, in labor, there's what's called the Weingarten rights, which in the mid-'70s, there was a ruling that said if an employee is going to be brought in for a meeting that may end up in discipline, that they have the right to a union representative being there. I think most of us who've watched Law and Order know that moment, right? When they, I want my union rep. What AGMA did, which was fantastic, is they reversed it. And they said, we want to reverse Weingarten. We want to say our members have the right to have a union representative with them if they want to file a complaint. And it was resisted initially, but I will say it exists in all of our major agreements today. And I give AGMA credit, but we grabbed onto it. And it has made such a difference in what has happened with respect to reporting and the strengthening of relationships with employers. Because by involving the union, first of all, you raise the issue so it doesn't fester in some other way. But by involving the union, you actually have a path to resolution that has really made an extraordinary difference. And it has also, before that exists in the agreement, before you have the right to do that, you have to negotiate it. So as we talk, like at the table, you learn a lot about each other and why people want things. And so the process of negotiating that has meant that there's been real listening on the part of employers and unions about what the needs are and how some of these issues of discrimination and harassment manifest in arts organizations. Other ways they're making demands, and I can't speak for Equity, but I can say, yay, Equity, there's additional sick leave, there's more covers, which means when an actor is sick, they actually aren't jeopardizing the entire production. And then hiring practices, and I'll just finish with this, which is our artists have demanded that there be changes in the practice of hiring, that those who have been historically excluded be allowed to work and to work at all levels of the industry and to have access at all levels of the industry. And unions are uniquely positioned to really be a mirror to organizations. We know who's working. We know who you're hiring. We know who you're not hiring. We know what you're paying who to. And when reported in the aggregate, along with research that we've started doing regularly at SDC, it's very eye-opening for employers when you sit down and you say, you know what, every dollar you spend, 70 cents goes to a man and 30% goes to a woman. And to have employers go, that can't be true. And we're like, but it is true. You know, you may hire closer to 50-50, but the women get the jobs in the smaller theaters and the men get the more, lucrative, if there is such a thing as lucrative in this business, jobs. So we've been able, I think, to really help move the ball on hiring because we're able to share that kind of information in the aggregate. So there's a few ways.
All right, I want to thank you both. First, I think you've made many points that I hope I'm going to echo here, because I think there's a lot of really, really provocative cross-pollination happening here. Before I get started, I think just, again, to respond to the elephant of the room of our current moment, and I think there's a lot of different lineages and trajectories you can trace to what we're seeing right now. A lot of those have been building for a long time. A lot of them aren't new. A lot of them are somewhat brand new and reactionary, or part of a reactionary kind of waxing and waning pattern. But I think one thing that we really need to keep in mind, and that's really, really relevant to this discussion, is that, you know, from the time of the beginning of the pandemic to maybe early 2022 was a period when labor in the United States had the greatest bargaining position that it had had in 50 years. And I think a lot of, especially the kind of oligarchic backlash that we're seeing right now and the kind of rapid effort to seize control has to be seen in that context. And I hope that that context is more hopeful than seeing it as something that's inevitable or a kind of period of kind of declension that we can't do anything about. Because I think that if they see that threat, we need to see it too and understand how to kind of wield it. So my research, and especially my first project, has been about the oil industry and oil industry workers in Houston and in Houston-based companies, which maybe seems to not have a lot of relevance here. But a big part of my story is studying Schlumberger. Apologies to any French speakers for the pronunciation. That's how they say it in Houston. And this company is an oil field services company. Some of you are probably familiar with it. And you're also almost definitely familiar with the Menil Museum in Houston, right? The Menil collection, and the kind of the de Menil family that's been a tremendous benefactor of the arts. And this is the same family that, you know, has been at the helm of Schlumberger for a really long time. And so part of what I ended up, you know, accidentally writing about in the book is how this arts infrastructure was related to the growth of this particular part of the oil industry in Houston. And of course, the funding of the arts in Houston by the Menil family, the de Menil family, comes from, you know, their genuine love for the arts. They're seeing a need for it in Houston. But of course, it's also part of a broader pattern of corporate philanthropy towards the arts, sowing goodwill in a community, avoiding taxes, all of these sorts of things. But also, I try to suggest that it was part of building up Houston as a city that could attract white-collar workers who would be willing to live there, to kind of plant this city as a place that could be a global city that had attractions that would make people want to live there instead of being seen as a backwater, right? And so this kind of echoes Richard Florida's thesis in The Creative Class, right? This idea that you've got arts and artists and arts infrastructure that is kind of creating real estate value or creating business benefit to cities also. And from the 1960s onward, these kind of intersecting objectives between certain kinds of businesses who were seeking white-collar workers and, you know, the needs of the arts for resources, for funding, these led to some really robust sources of both public and private arts funding, especially in key global cities like Houston, New York, Los Angeles, et cetera. And this kind of language, this kind of understanding of the objective gave artists some leverage to secure funding through being able to make a claim that even transgressive art could work in the interest of capital. It could be something that made money through making real estate profitable, through attracting, the right kinds of workers, et cetera. But this was always a really tenuous coalition. And so Sharon Zukin's now classic book, I think it's 50 years old at this, almost 50 years old at this point, Loft Living, she writes about the creation of Soho in New York, and she writes about how this was a neighborhood, this was a speculative real estate investment that was built on the back of artists who were very quickly pushed out of the neighborhood, who didn't have any legal protections, who weren't even prioritized once they'd kind of given that primitive accumulation, essentially, to make this real estate valuable. And I think this fits into a broader pattern of how under neoliberalism, I think this echoes a lot of things that Angie pointed out too, so much of arts, arts organizations seeking funding that's not coming just through commercial, market exchange, has had to be in this language of showing how the arts had monetary value, showing how the arts made money. And they had a different, there's been a few different ways of doing this by talking about how the arts generate value for cities or for communities through real estate, through attracting workers. But even if we think about, maybe arts efforts that try to be more kind of community, speaking to the community, it's often in the language of kind of building up, under-resourced communities. It's still in this language of how are we going to make these communities, how are we going to bring better workers, how are we going to make these communities more valuable? But of course, the other way is through generating commercial value, making commodities that people want, film, music, graphic design, et cetera. And so I was thinking about this as I was trying to make sense of our current moment, and of course, attacks on public funding for all kinds of things are happening right now, including attacks on funding for the arts. And in a lot of ways, this is following a very old playbook, right? Longstanding right-wing attacks on the arts as wasteful, transgressive, especially attacks on public funding for the arts. This is nothing new. We've seen this for most of our lifetime. But even in the midst of these kinds of right-wing attacks, the arguments that appealed to making money continued to have pathways to work, even amidst these kinds of attacks on nude paintings or on heretical art, for instance. And it became this kind of culture war issue that you could ultimately kind of overcome by proving that it was profitable in some way. And in fact, the historian Lisa Dugan, in her book it's like 20 years old at this point, she writes about these kinds of attacks on the arts and also on kind of studies of gender and sexuality in universities. She talks about these arguments about what kind of art or scholarship should or should not be publicly funded as part of a broader neoliberal attack on, quote, wasteful government spending and an effort to reduce public support for, public support, to give an idea that the public shouldn't be in this business of doing anything transgressive or not strictly necessary, defined in a particular way. But I think that we're in a moment of the rupture of this fragile status quo. I mean, what we're seeing right now is drawing from this playbook in a lot of ways, but it's also going far beyond this calculus in ways that I think are very damaging, but could possibly be an opportunity. And so I'm thinking about this in terms of the question about broader non-arts kind of cross-organizing. So I'm thinking of two primary examples. So earlier, right-wing attacks on public support for the arts demarcated kind of particular examples of purportedly egregious, offensive works. But the current attack on public support for, everything is painted with a much broader brush. And as we've seen, the current agents of this destruction are celebrating taking a literal chainsaw to figurative government waste, in quotation marks. But this kind of attack has only worked in the past because it's been careful and strategic. This careless approach is drawing great ire from people who traditionally might have been apathetic or even hostile to something like the National Endowment for the Arts, for instance. So likewise, the overt, narrow definition that we're seeing in the current administration about what kind of speech is permissible is also making the game too obvious. There's tremendous opportunity, I think, for artists to join with scientists, with humanities and social science researchers, with medical researchers, with Parks Department employees, even veterans, to draw connections across these attacks and to make affirmative arguments for how robust public support is essential across a range of fields and objectives. And I think this is really an opportunity to affirm rather than defend. When we're thinking about those earlier attacks on the arts, I think it necessarily put people on the defensive. But I think the sloppiness of this attack hopefully provides the opportunity to provide an affirmative defense that can think outside of these logics that we've been stuck in. The second example I want to talk about draws from the 2023 Writers Guild strike and then the SAG-AFTRA strike, which I saw as such a remarkable moment. And again, kind of part of this evidence of the bargaining power of labor that was possible even kind of a year later than I said earlier. What got a lot of the press was the debates about AI, the use of AI, and I think both the promises and the panic over AI have been somewhat overblown in the media. But what the WGA strike and the SAG-AFTRA strike illuminated was something that I think had not been publicly visible before. And that is the fact that AI is so fundamentally based on theft, and that art is making people money, but it's not even always making money as art. It's making money as data. And that's something that also brings us all together, right? That you don't have to be an artist for that to be true about you. We all have personal data that is making other people rich. And I think there's an opportunity to frame this theft as something that affects all of us. Because threats to artists, art can also be seen as threats to data privacy. And again, there's this opportunity to affirm, not to defend. Not about trying to stop AI, but to draw attention to the expropriation that has made it to begin with. I also think just there's fundamentally an opportunity to talk about useful work. So much of is obscured in the tech economy, but the fact that we create the products that others profit from has in a lot of ways never been more obvious. And I think if that's something that is true for artists working in a range of different places, but is also true for any of us, even those of us who aren't artists. So I'll leave it there.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Now I feel really intimidated to follow those three. Chose my seat badly. Yeah. So to switch gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about kind of the historical evolution of the systems of labor and health insurance that we're in, and how they combine to create some structures that are less than ideal. And I can only hold out some hope that the shotgun approach of the current administration leads an ability to rebuild in a better way. So this is a deep or shallow dive into some interconnected parts of labor law. There's three things I want to talk about, and then I want to talk about the kind of intentional or unintentional consequences, I'm not sure which, that they've developed. So the first is that the Fair Labor Standards Act divides workers into two categories: workers that are overtime eligible and workers that are not. And managers are not overtime eligible, or at least the employer has the option to not pay overtime. Interestingly, creative professionals also are in this bucket. So that's the first part of the Venn diagram. The second part of the Venn diagram is the National Labor Relations Act, which divides workers into those who are allowed to organize and those who are not allowed to organize. And managers and subcontractors are not allowed to organize. So some creative professionals are subcontractors. None of them are managers by any definition in the law. then we create a system. The past we inherited a system in which quality health insurance is only available through employers or large group plans provided by associations such as unions. So again, subcontractors, piece workers don't have easy access to health insurance. And the ACA is fantastic and wonderful and a great first step, and also, is totally inadequate for workers crossing state lines, and just doesn't offer the wealth of benefits that large group plans do. These are the consequences of these things, which were set up like 100 years ago on some of these laws, and more than 50 on the health insurance, is that if art is paid for on a fee basis, which is the logical consequence of making creative professionals exempt from overtime, and you're paying them for their work by the piece. So now the value of the art is on the piece only. And then, so the product is valued, but not the making or the process of making the art. And yet, as other speakers this weekend have referenced, the actual process of art making with your community is a positive social good. But it literally has no way to be valued in our industry. And I should emphasize that this is coming from a theater lens. But the pay by the piece, we have other words to describe this ecosystem, sweatshops, for example, and it is the underlying structure of the gig economy for the workers. And then in regional theater, we've taken these combination of people who are eligible and ineligible for overtime, and people who can be organized or can't be organized by unions, to create 3 buckets of the way we imagine paying for the work. So the first is actors are considered creative professionals. By labor law, they don't have to be paid overtime. In actuality, the way their union contracts work, it's a hybrid. They're paid for some overtime, not all. They're kind of on a salary, but not quite. Designers and directors are strictly fee-based, except for places like California that are trying to make new rules, but it's like those rules are colliding with the historical forces in the United States. And then tech workers, my people, are paid hourly. And are overtime eligible. And all of these workers have different unions, some with locals, some with only national organizations. It's an incredibly complicated mosaic. And they're effectively competing for the same resources from the same employers. And they have separate health insurance plans with no crossover. That's still true. Right? With no crossover possibilities. And so let me say, if you're in a theater and you talk to an administrator, you talk to someone on the shop floor, and you ask them, how did you get in the theater? A very common answer is acting. Harrison Ford was an actor before he was a movie star. There are people who are actor-directors. There are, technician musicians. There are more multi-hyphenates than I can even imagine. And that means that you can be a full-time theater arts worker, 80 hours a week, and be eligible for no health insurance plan. Or overtime, because you're part fee, part hourly, and your employers aren't counting it together. So this then creates what I wrote during my words, a discontinuous, complex, unconnected, and onerous pay and work condition practices for the industry. And at least in professional theater, actually leans into these silos and categories. So now if you are a multi-hyphenate, you're not rewarded for having those different skills, hyper-specialization is rewarded more than generalists or multi-specialization. Just a side note, when we go into the world of AI, I think this is also something that is really going to confront the theater industry at some point. This partitioning of the workforce, it just means that you can't put a living together if you don't choose your silo. And that's a sad thing for the art. And then within the organizations, which are often critiqued for administrative bloat, but the pay rules that the administrators are faced with a combination of fees, hourly pay, penalties, multiple levels of overtime, that literally, like a simple Excel spreadsheet can't calculate, that a human being can't figure out how to operate in these systems without years of training and practice, creates this administrative burden to administer the contracts. Even figuring out how to accommodate the different work rules of meals and rest breaks between actors, stagehands, and musicians is something that production managers struggle with every day. They create inefficiencies, which literally makes the entire company work longer and harder for marginal benefit from just not having meal and rest breaks match. And if we didn't have such a disconnected, obtruse level of work rules, we could literally spend less money on administration, put the administrators like me out of work instead of artists. I think there are many ways to challenge our current systems. But the biggest unintended, well, actually, I think there's probably intended consequence of the separation of workers into buckets that overlap but don't quite, is that it separates the collaborative workers of art into two categories, managers and workers that create an oppressor-oppressed paradigm, an us versus them dichotomy that is just not true and not necessary, but is a way to separate our power to work together, right? If we really go into this, literally the entities and humans that benefit from the system are the lawyers, the health insurance providers. It doesn't benefit the artists, the craftspeople. It essentially drains resources from the industry. That's my bad ending.
Okay. Here are some things I think are true about artists and labor. Art is absolutely labor, it is absolutely work, and it is not the same as all other forms of labor. Art is a form of labor that we feel called to do and is part of our humanity, and many of us would do it whether we are paid or not, and that does not make it okay to exploit us.
I think we have a microphone. Sorry.
Pretend that I said something smart. Another thing I think is true about artists and labor is that fundamentally what artists need is the same thing as everyone else, which is an economy that works better for everyone. And there's really no meaningful change for artists' lives and livelihoods until we actually address the structural inequity of our economy and the kind of basic tenets of the way our economy works, which I think we are seeing the logical, if perhaps arriving faster than we might have hoped, outcome of structuring an economy that is built to extract our humanity and our natural resources in service of capital instead of using capital to support our humanity and our natural resources. So unless we actually change those things, then a lot of what we can do specifically for artists is just, a Band-Aid. Some of the most meaningful policy change, I think, that would make life better for a lot of people, including artists, are things like public option healthcare, portable benefits, and economic stabilizers like guaranteed income, baby bonds, free college. Those are the things that would make it possible for all of us to live artful lives and creative lives, and for all of us to be able to offer our creativity and culture in service of our communities and their needs, and make it more viable for more people to consider art as their job, as their vocation and their career. Right now, a thing that is true about artists is that most artists occupy this kind of structural gray area between gig worker and small business owner. And they're falling through the cracks of both of those systems, neither of which are very good systems to begin with. And I think we can't have the conversation about artists' needs without having the broader conversation about what our communities get back and what the value of artists' contributions and creativity and culture is at a really human level. And then that brings us to the context of the now that I feel like none of us have the right words to say, like, what is this other than bad? And it's bad at a system level in a way that it has been bad for all of the years that the United States has been trying to be the United States. These systems have been bad, and they're compounding. And it is also profoundly bad right now at an individual level. Like, we feel shitty. And that's like proven in research, the epidemic of loneliness and people's feelings about social isolation and the polarization that we're experiencing. All of these things, like, I think are a part of us paying the price for living inside these systems. Artists are part of how we build our way out of this. I think the need to reclaim our power and rebuild, particularly at a local level, our social connections, our local economies, that starts with creativity and it starts with culture change. So I wouldn't say I feel optimistic, but I do think it would be a shame if we waste a crisis and the opportunity that comes with crisis to try to imagine and build the world that we actually want to live in. And I really believe that that starts locally and it starts with culture. And I think that that's going to take those of us who have been in the arts, who are used to the systems the way they worked, and even those of us in this room that have worked to change those systems, developing a greater comfort with giving up some of what we think is the way that it's supposed to be, or the way that it has been, or the way that it has almost worked. Which, means that the art system just replicates the broader economy. It's not a mystery why our system is inequitable or why it doesn't work for the people who are making the work. It's just like all the other systems we live in. And then you layer on, for the arts, this sort of marginal, siloed funding that's focused primarily on large institutions and artists with commercial potential and established programs. That's not going to meet this moment. So I think we have to just really think differently about what infrastructure looks like for creativity and culture in this country. I don't know all of what that looks like, but these are some things that I think are a part of it. The first thing is direct support for creative makers. We have to get out of this kind of winner-take-all approach that prioritizes artists from privileged backgrounds who can afford to work for minimal compensation, and really think about, from the beginning, who gets to call themselves an artist, who sees art making and creativity as a viable path in their lives beyond childhood. And we have to stop pushing artists into this kind of highly commodified product over process framework. And like a lot of folks have said, I think that will mean that we have to find our solidarity with other economic justice movements. If I can bring it into the practical for a minute, for us at Springboard, one of the most joyful things we've done in recent history is our now 3-year-old pilot in guaranteed income. We created that pilot coming out of the pandemic, having run emergency relief locally and helping folks start emergency relief funds all over the country for artists. I'm really proud of that work. I'm really proud of that emergency relief work. It really mattered a lot. And as anyone who's done emergency relief work can tell you, nothing will make you realize faster how much that doesn't change anything about why people are in an emergency in the first place. So we came out of that with, I think, a renewed and more urgent commitment to think about, like, how are we engaging in more structural change? And we got involved through our city government in the National Guaranteed Income Movement. So our city, the city of St. Paul, was doing a guaranteed income pilot through the mayor's office. We created what we called at the time a sidecar pilot for artists in our neighborhood. And our goal from the beginning was, for sure, to support artists. But it was also to make sure that our pilot was linked to this broader movement in a way that helped people see that artists should absolutely be at the table for economic change and are necessary recipients of these kinds of economic changes. And they have these powerful skills to bring to those movements. There is a reciprocity there. So our pilot is place-based. It's now based in our neighborhood in St. Paul and in our rural community where our rural office is in Otter Tail County. We have 100 artists across the 2 sites. And as of this fall, we have made the commitment that it is a 5-year pilot, which means that this little pilot for these 100 artists is the longest running guaranteed income pilot in the country, not for artists, but for anyone. And for me, the important part of that is not the bragging rights of being able to say it's a 5-year pilot, but it is the way that we are able to work with that broader movement, with the research piece of it, so that that work is contributing to this broader system change agenda, to the broader public policy advocacy in a way that doesn't silo artists off and say they deserve something special over here, but says, here, artists are part of this broader thing, are part of this broader movement, and they have a lot to contribute. We've also built into that work all along narrative change work, where artists are working with participants from other guaranteed income programs to design projects that help speak to their neighbors about our shared humanity, about what it means to be able to take a breath or to take care of your family. These things that really push on these American ideas that our value is only based on how much we contribute economically. And I think the symbolism for the artists in that pilot, for their community to say, your presence here has value, the presence of your creativity and culture in this community is what has value, not the thing you make, the project or the product or the thing to sell. I think that has helped change artists' relationship to their own practice and think about the ways that they can bring their practice into their own community and the ways that they want to push against some of those systems that have boxed them in. I think another piece that's necessary for a forward-looking, equitable arts infrastructure is better support for everyday creativity. I think we tend to talk about that in the realm of arts education for young people, and then we never really talk about the outlets that adults have for their story to be heard and held, and for people to participate in shared experience with their neighbors. And if we're not living in a moment where we see what happens when people don't feel like their story is heard and held, then I don't know what we're living in. And then the last thing that I want to lift up in that vision of a more equitable arts infrastructure, or infrastructure for creativity and social connection, whatever you want to call it, is the role that kind of locally rooted, place-based, cross-sector, people-focused kind of organizations play. These organizations exist all across the country. They are small. They are part of the fabric of their neighborhoods. They are teaching kids and supporting artists and welcoming people in to drop graham crackers on the floor and step on them and do whatever they need to do to build community with one another. And we tend to just sort of gloss over that part of infrastructure. Or if people think about it in their community, they think of it as like, oh, that's kind of a special magic thing that we have. Most of those organizations are run by artists. They are really critical to people getting their social and community needs met. And I think we need to think about how to resource those kinds of organizations and see those as cultural institutions or anchors in the way that we have historically talked about kind of downtown art palaces that maybe aren't for everyone in a community. I think about that a lot in our work. Springboard's headquarters is in a former vacant car dealership in the middle of one of the highest needs neighborhoods that is also one of the richest cultural neighborhoods in our city. And we teach artists business skills. We have access to capital programs. We host artist markets. We host performances. We have an ice skating rink. We seriously. We have open public space where people can hang out and get some basic needs met, granola bars, diapers, those kinds of things. And that, to me, is the role and the power of creativity and culture, and that's the part of the ecosystem I'm invested in supporting, because it's where I think the change that we need in this moment starts, is the places where we can come together with our neighbors, have a shared experience, talk with one another, realize our power in making something, our power in seeing what our community members have made, and that doesn't solve everything. There are very large forces at work, so it's not a like rose-colored glasses moment where like, well, just get together and ice skate and then buy some work from local artists and everything will be fixed. But I think if we don't start there, then whatever we build will not serve the people who are in our communities. So for me, it's like a first principles moment where we have to kind of go back to really basic stuff, like how we be together and how we share. The end.
Sarah, can I say just
Please.
one thing?
Yes.
So, Alex, you had said that you thought maybe there was this overreach, and then listening to Alice, I'm like, well, why the fuck are we fighting for these types of, I mean, like, it's asinine. In this day and age, there was a moment during the robber barons when the management class made sense to exclude. It doesn't now. And then hearing Laura talk about it. So all of which is just to say, I keep thinking about what's the game of chicken we're playing right now with this administration? Like, I don't know if I'm being accurate. I'm just going to say it this way. I think that we are definitely in what's considered late stage capitalism, where how you earn money is from your ideas. We don't do manufacturing the same way. We don't have a robust middle class. So what that means is when we have an economy based on the best ideas getting the most money, and that one or two people can have an idea so fabulous that they can have the wealth that competes other nation states, right? That's where we are right now. So they don't give a shit about workers. So, and this is partly why tech bros right now and Doge is like, we should give everyone, what is it, $5,000 checks, taxpayers only, which cuts out the lowest income earners. But That's a guaranteed income. Why of all people, why of all libertarians would they want to do something like that? Because they want to placate. So in my equation, the game of chicken is they know there's very little left to extract in the world. We are now in financialized capitalism, which basically means that from, not even from your birth, from before, almost before you came out, your parents were indebted to a medical system oftentimes. You go into college and you get student loan debt. You go to jail, you get carceral debt. There are certain states that you get student lunch debt. The level of debt, meaning it's no longer enough that someone is going to try to extract as much of your working power to get value out of you. Now they're going to get to the level where you're indebted to create the economy that we live in. And I say all that, which sounds so meta, to actually say, okay, so this is the game of chicken. You all have already figured out from birth to grave how to get as much out of every single person here. And I don't think it's an overreach. I think it's very legitimately a good cultural ploy, frankly, to make us all run around like, oh my God, and using scare tactics of, oh, you support DEI, you're a terrorist organization. Why is that so effective? Well, we're seeing it be effective. Blue states, more than red states, are getting rid of DEI language. And what that does is it erodes our sense of being able to hold the powers that be accountable. We are so afraid. We're afraid of what? We're afraid of our institutions going under, and of course, the human threat. Like, you don't want to struggle with litigation. You don't want to have your nonprofit status taken away. But I've told staff, I'm like, all right, if our 501c3 status goes away, we can be nimble. We'll figure it out. We can still do our work. I'm not saying that to diminish how frightful this is, but to weave it back to, if this is the moment that we're in, I think their biggest fear is that they're going to be held accountable because there will be a massive level of social upheaval and uprising. It's the same motivations that motivated the Gilded Age to create philanthropy at an institutional level in the first place. So when I look around and I see how afraid people are, and how I am also I just came back from a convening of people who represent homelessness, crises, and I mean, just all sorts of different social safety net services, and they're just running around. So literally almost every email, their budgets are diminishing by 25%, another 25%. Oh, Chan Zuckerberg, they're out 40%. When I see them freaking out about their existential crisis, what I'm also really worried about is how we're all trying to save our own institutions and save our own sectors. And what I'm hearing from Laura, and I absolutely agree with her, is the floor that we need to create to allow for social revolution and social accountability to the powers that be, the floor that needs to be put in place is that people need to feel like we have each other's backs. That's that psychological one. They need to know who their neighbors are. That's that ice rink one. We need to have actually enough money. Guaranteed income is actually strategic for all of our progressive movement because it creates the floor for there to be risk taking. And we need to forgive student loan debt, and that just ain't going to happen right now, but whatever. But there are things that we can be pushing for that, frankly, on the right, they are also pushing for because they want to mitigate social upheaval. And that's why I say that, yes, every industry has special needs, unique circumstances. But I'm going to the table being like, yo, we show up in your labor industry. How can we get some wins that create a floor for us to have the conditions for us to fight? And I will say, and this I put on our own sector, we have done too well of a job siloing ourselves, where even in the way that we use competitions to pit people against each other, but also reward people who went through an academically, I know, thank you for being in an academic, this is a context in an academic institution, but to put people on a professionalization track because they went through academia. Academia, if you're an MFA student, you know this, you're not actually integrated with other social issues. You're told to sit in an ivory box and think about your own artistic statement, right? That is so harmful for society for moments like this where we need artists now. And over, I hear artists say, I wish I had been better educated about these political issues. I wish I had more education because I feel like I'm a fraud because I've never had to be integrated on those social issues. So I just think this is an amazing moment for laying the groundwork for the next thing. And we've got to get out of our own way about worrying about our own institutions and start to understand, like, what's the terra firma for us to all be in common cause on.
Yes, check one. I think Laura P. has a follow-up on that. I just want to thank you for lifting up this don't waste this crisis vibe, by which we say, like, a crisis that's guaranteed to disorient or immobilize or, create all this wasted energy. I wrote down when you all were starting, like, I think we might not have anything in common really in this group except this idea of wanting to be accountability workers for this moment, right? So whether it's you're historically accounting or practically accounting, or you're trying to translate the purposely by design confusing systems that artists are trying to work through, like, what are each of our roles as accountability practitioners in this moment, because our institutions are being sledgehammered by a hate-filled wrecking ball and everything else. So just to tip it over to Laura, is this okay with what you're about to say?
Yes, yeah. I mean, so many things. And I do think the labor movement does create a floor, and there's something to be learned from that and shared, because you do have minimum terms and conditions that apply to everyone. And I do think we have to be more interconnected societally, so that we're not so siloed. And I do think some of the work that we've been doing in the arts and entertainment unions is really about our collective strength, and not just our collective strength in negotiating with management, but our collective strength in advocacy and in activism at a federal and a state level to try to make sure that artists, arts workers, arts organizations are given the support that they need to be able to do what they do, which is to support the work of artists. I do think, this is going to surprise you, Alice, but I just have a couple things. One is, I just want to say with respect to the health, access to health care and union workers, each union has a health fund that's managed by a separate entity that oversees both health and defined pension benefit plans, which actually in large part are what sustained the middle class. And the only place they exist today really are through unions, because they don't happen, because corporate America wants the 401ks, and anyhow. So those are separate. I will say with the IA, so with the Stagehands Union, International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees, their health plan is bundled. So they've really moved from local plans to a national that actually covers designers are part of that, makeup artists, wardrobe workers, so that there is a joint fund that many of those that work in the IA can access. I think if anyone there's eligibility thresholds. So you have to hit an eligibility threshold, just like you would for, anywhere that you work, because we don't have single payer health. But
can I ask you, you say that unions are going to be a good floor. I disagree, because I want unions. Don't get me wrong. I am very pro-union. But unions have been they are a manifestation of the kind of infrastructure we have when we want to hold employers accountable. And frankly, there are a lot of type of workers, including artists, who are just not going to have the typical conventional employer system. And so unions have been, for us, a real challenge in terms of imagining what is a safety net that includes everyone, and in a way that it holds people who give you a paycheck accountable. But I have found them to be very resistant around anything that supports artists who are outside of union situations, and they just perpetuate this misclassification debate. So I agree, unions are amazing. There's just so many more people that are now falling farther and farther out of unions. That can't continue to be our solution, is my thinking.
What do you mean by misclassification?
That artists are, they're supposed to be employed by somebody.
Well, that when they are employed, they're employed by someone, which is what labor unions.
And there's a lot of artists
I know
who will
that
not,
are
yeah.
that are independent artists. So, but what I'm talking about is like artists who work for employers. So that's my vantage point is from. And
I just like getting a little juicy here.
Yeah, no, that's
Juice
good.
it
Well, I
up,
was going to
juice
get
it up.
juicy back because I do think I appreciate, Alice, the collaboration that takes place between the people that make the work and managers, but those are not the same people. There is a power differential there. So I may collaborate with the production manager, or I may have a relationship with other managers in the building, but if have been brought in to do a specific production, it's not the same. Like it's not an even playing field. So the fact that managers and arts workers inside organizations are in separate employee groups, for me, it's like, well, yeah, because they're different. One has hiring and firing, or at least disciplinary, positions and authorities, and the others don't. So those can't be together. And I think the classification or misclassification, because I just want to say that it's not just California. I mean, for directors, they're being paid on salary all across the country. So the fact that they're paid fees in many situations, they're also paid salaries. So okay.
Yeah, I want to
Just
give
leave
Alice a
it there.
chance to chime in if you're sitting with something, and also just lift up that there are a million barriers to this question of equity, right? So I think what we're actually surfacing here, these things that pop up and foreclose, right? So something that we're talking about is enabling for a certain population and foreclosing for another. I actually think putting these on blast is the work, and it's going to feel sticky like this because we're fighting for something, but we're also fighting for real people. And in your jobs and in your perch, you're exactly at this table because of that expertise in fighting for a certain sort of population. So I'm saying, yes, this is the work, people. Like, this is the sweaty under the armpits, because it's like not ideal systems, right? So Alice, take us home, and then I have a canvassing question for the group.
I mean, thank you, Laura, for engaging in the conversation. I would say that many managers actually are on a spectrum, right? And the whole idea of hiring and firing, like that's showing us trapped in the paradigm to a certain extent. But someone who is the head of a lighting department isn't so distant from the person hanging the lights, right? So that in actual employment, it is not a clean, bright line, us versus them. Yes, there's a power dynamic. It's super complicated. There's another dynamic of what is an individual to do trapped in between the two powers of the union and the employer. And I've seen that be essentially a trash compactor situation for many workers and artists. So, and by necessity, we cannot get into all the nuances and complications here. One of my main points in bringing this all up is that, yes, there's some cooperation between unions, but like, why do we need a different way to pay for and a different union for all these different categories of theater workers? Wouldn't the whole industry benefit from some kind of baseline that recognizes everyone's contributing value, that we have an honest conversation about what everyone should be paid for for various roles, and we have one giant set or a couple of giant sets of health insurance providers, retirement benefit providers that are allowing someone who may be, to Angie's point, an independent artist sometime, but actually has done some work and so is eligible for SDC or some other union to just provide that access to the benefits. Right now it's barrier after barrier after barrier for the individuals to get through these systems. And I also don't want to put this all on unions, that employers could also do a much better job of collaborating, provide benefits to workers across businesses in cities and states across the nation. My kind of thesis was, if unions and employers and managers were actually collaborating to support workers, that creates the new table that Esther mentioned, that Brian referenced with James Baldwin yesterday. It's like, we need a new table for the employer union paradigm.
Yep, I want to let Alex jump in for sure. I think you made that point earlier, and I want to say, let's keep going with this. What is kind of categorically wrong is this disintegration, the weird siloing, but then also the contingencies that are inside of the existing system. So go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that if the current efforts right now to cut the federal workforce succeeds even by a fraction of what they're claiming they want to do, coupled with the tech layoffs that we've seen, I mean, we're going into a recession. So, and I'm not being predictive. I'm just saying, like, if this happens, this will happen in the absence of something else. And I think that it's very true that we're all going to be facing, not just these attacks, but also unemployment and underemployment, at a larger scale in the coming years, which means I think that there is a lot of work to do, not just with people, who are employed, but also people who are not. And there are some precedents for this that I think that this will be a great moment to try to look at what people have done about this in the past. I mean, the one that's the most familiar to me is something not from my research, but from my personal life, which is that CU unions at Yale University have done in the past, I'm not sure if it's still going on, but they have tried to do a kind of community-based kind of solidarity and organizing effort with people in New Haven who are unemployed, and kind of they had the ability to kind of trace it all back, to Yale, because it's a small town, it's a company town in a lot of ways, and also because a big part of the reason that Yale does not have the kind of, that New Haven could have greater employment, except for the fact that Yale University doesn't pay any property taxes, right? So there was this way to provide this analysis that traced all these things together. That's more complicated if you're talking on a national level or even on the level of a larger city. But I think there is organizing, whether, I don't know structurally what that looks like within a union or within some other structure, but I think in terms of a political narrative, there's certainly a lot of other examples that we could look to of how to kind of put all of these things together in terms of mobilizing people.
Thank you for a concrete, kind of a question of not manifesting now and looking backwards to blueprints for the revolution. We can do it, by the way. The 2 minutes that remain, because I struggle with word economy and time management, but seriously, this is a frothy one. This conversation is frothing up, and we have a half-hour break after this, and we're going to keep buzzing in the lobby, and I have a feeling it's the beginning of some more momentum building. We've asked everybody at the close to talk about concrete examples of what's being manifest right now. So maybe Alex kicked it off, like this idea of examples of things that are hopeful, inspiring, that they're sitting with. I want to echo Angie's excitement, because if we think about U.S. history, that this moment could have some excitement in it. There's this weird bad pattern, right? Like, only in moments of exceptional U.S. economic crisis have artists ever been included in these broader ARPA, WPA, CETA policies as workers. That's a historical fact, and it's ridiculous, right? But I see a lot of people using the ARPA funds and rerouting the ARPA funds over the past 3 years to start to build a case for what Laura Z is talking about, which is putting a floor in place that would actually stabilize income for everyone, and then a rising tide lifts all boats. So whether you start from ARPA or not, what kind of momentum or traction or experiments are you seeing, are you sitting with, even if it's practical experiments inside of your work, Alice, like as someone negotiates, how are they bending a rule to make it do something else? It could really be micro-practical, or it could be programmatic, but can we go back down the line as quickly as you feel you can and just give us a little manifestation energy, something that's going on that's like, well, at least there's that. And then we're going to go blackout, just for this panel. We have another one coming.
I would just say there's so many, but I would say for people listening in and people who really want something tangible, this is not sort of like airy-fairy. It really legit, like, go get involved and get to know your neighbors who are suffering right now through formalized, more kind of community-led efforts where it's not dependent on a 501c3. So I'm coming out of LA County. We just had these devastating wildfires. What's happening in, for instance, like the Palisades area are people who are informally organizing and getting to know each other even better. I mean, just showing up for things like that, and then that's gonna be your finger on the pulse of when the doors of opportunity open.
So much to say. I was going to talk about sort of manifesting actually a kind of collaboration between, because I do represent union members who are employed by organizations, that this is the moment for real partnership, but it's different partnership than you're talking about, because I don't see it barrier after barrier after barrier. I do see it as a partnership, and I believe very strongly that the infrastructure, if you will, of the arts and culture in this country has to be strong in order for people to have jobs. And to get the union movement, if you will, in this industry to not be afraid to advocate for employers. Because if the employers are not strong, then they're not going to be able to hire my members. And so I've really been pushing, and I've been pushing my colleagues to find a place where we can do that kind of work. Where we can't do it is when we start to actually, like, we have to collaborate together, but we can't collaborate together if one of the party is wrong and the other one's right, because that's not collaboration, right? And so I think in this moment we have to figure out how to create strength in the field so that we can have good jobs, careers, support to artists. And so we have to figure out how to bring that conversation together.
Awesome.
I would, two quick things. One is across the U.S., we're seeing more theaters trying to figure out how to work together than in the past. So the crisis creates collaboration, floats all boats is a positive. And then the other positive that I rest in, even though I don't know how it actually manifests, is that, we are in a point where society is broken down because people are not talking to each other. We all see each other as the other. We're put ourselves into two false camps that are, it's just a lie. And theater is the cure for that. It might be medicine no one wants to take, but it's medicine that works. And I feel like there is something there that can help us as a nation through this moment and as a world.
Yeah, just echoing a lot of what's been said. I think I believe we are in a moment when no one is coming to save us. So our work has to be about building the capacity of our neighbors, our friends, our communities to save ourselves. So things like mutual aid, being in community in a place-based way, relocalizing our economies and thinking about how we support what's tangible and real and face-to-face, and creating the cultural experiences that help people build power and agency so that we can organize and we can build from the needs of our actual communities and from the needs of the many more people who are not billionaires than who are.
This is a soulful group, and they have brought this. I just have to say, these 5 people, if we could create a time capsule, we'll have a 90-minute archive of this. I feel like it just needs to be distributed to any undergrad arts student in the history of ever. This idea of creating accountability, seeking more information historically about how did we get here versus just the uncritical acceptance of the status quo, right? So this has just been a syllabus, and a course in fighting the fight. So I just have to thank you all for the soul and wisdom that you're bringing to that work. And if we can carry this conversation into the lobby, and we'll take things out next, and I'll kick it to one of my besties when she's doing the outro. Please join me in thanking provisionally this amazing panel and conversation and expert squad.
Hi, everyone.
I'm Jasmine Mahmood. I'm one of the research group members. I want to just say I kept showing Paul 3 pages of notes from your dialogue. So can we give them one more round of applause for that amazing, amazing panel? That was really enlightening. We're going to take a 25-minute break. Attendees that have joined us on live stream, we hope you join us again at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific. And I actually think 11 a.m. Hawaii time. We're excited to see you all back in about 25 minutes. Thanks again.